Hey folks, Palmer Tom's here with Nick Roush of KSR, Kentucky Sports Radio. And we're doing a little bit of a crossover here, DawgsHQ, KSR, Georgia, Kentucky crossover for this top 20 matchup. Nick, first of all, appreciate you coming on, and how you doing today?
Great. It doesn't feel like it's only Wednesday when we're recording this, but it's just crazy. I'm at the point though, Palmer, where it you come off the high of the Florida win, and for Kentucky fans beating Florida, that's feels good, right? So
Three
I'm
straight
drinking the
times.
I'm drunk on the Kool-Aid through Monday, and then by Tuesday I'm like, oh no, Georgia still. They're still going to be Georgia, and then by like Friday night I'm going to be barking back at the dogs on Clayton Street, ready for a Cats win. So it's kind of the emotions you go through as a fan, but I'm fired up. It doesn't feel like Saturday can get here soon enough.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just talking about that, it feels like, man, it's already Wednesday. It's already week 6. We're going to be halfway through this football season, through this regular season after Saturday. I mean, God, blank, and this season will be over because off season seems to last forever, and then the
Right,
season never
right.
lasts long enough.
And then it's also for both programs where you had this long runway of Maction teams, and Kentucky opens with Vandy. It felt like you didn't really get to see the real football for a while. So we're here now. This is a real game, a
Yeah,
big game, and I'm curious on your end. For the longest time, we always loved Georgia fans because Kentucky, they were so nice. They're nice because we were so non-threatening. But now, even though Kentucky hasn't given them the Dogs a really good scare, it's never a game that Georgia blows the doors off them. So how do Georgia fans feel going into this game against Kentucky?
yeah. It's funny that we're talking about this because the Athletic put out an article today titled "The Weirdly Competitive Yet One-Sided Series Between Georgia and Kentucky," which is a perfect way of describing it.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you said, Kentucky used to be little old Kentucky, and they're no longer that. Kirby Smart describes them as the most physical team that they play every season, and that when you talk to Georgia players at the combine, at pro day, after they've left the program, what is the most physical game that they've played? The one that they feel the most is Kentucky every year, and I think it's a testament to what Mark Stoops has done up there in Lexington, just getting his teams up to par in the SEC and above that. Because I mean, like you said, this is a Kentucky program that is now regularly competing for the SEC East with Georgia. At least I think back to that 2018 game that was the
Mm-hmm.
SEC East championship game.
Right.
Where the winner was going to Atlanta and the loser was staying home. It's not uncommon for Kentucky to be, that second team in the East, the one that's given Georgia a run for its money. And, last season wasn't that, but it was a physical game up there in Lexington, cold one. An ugly slobber knocker there, 16-6, I believe was the final score. The only thing that anybody in Athens can seem to remember about that game is just how cold it was. But 2 years ago, it was a good game here in Athens. A
Mm-hmm.
3:30 CBS game. This one going to be a 7:00 game on ESPN, which is always exciting. A night game at Sanford Stadium. I think that as Georgia fans look at this Kentucky matchup, and like you said, it's real football. It's here. You turn the
Mm-hmm.
calendar to October, and you've got some big games that are coming up for both these teams. Georgia coming off of a road win at Auburn, Kentucky coming off of a home win over Florida. Like you said, after playing the MAC and both teams played Ball State, you had Vanderbilt early on. Georgia had South Carolina, and that turned into a bit, more serious of a game than was expected. But the last week felt like real football, and this one is a real matchup. I think it's an exciting one because it's a team that these two teams are built similarly, and they're
Mm-hmm.
going to play similarly. I think that is advantage Georgia because of the talent that Georgia has compared to
Right,
Kentucky.
right.
But that's not to say that, Kentucky can't do some things that can exploit what Georgia isn't doing well right now. That's because Kentucky knows exactly how to play against a Georgia type team because they do it every day in practice.
Yeah, you really crushed it with the similarly there. That's like my one. I try to avoid that word at all costs on these things because I sound like a local yokel from in between the hollers. But you're right. Like Nick Delatorre from Gators Online, he's on with Staples last week, and he's like, I don't know why Florida would try to out Kentucky, and Stoops has tried to out Georgia, but you can't really do that. So that's why the games have been close. That's why Kentucky's covered in every game going back to 18 is because they do feature such similar styles. But the part where I think this year could be different, at least from Kentucky's sake, is that they have a lot more explosiveness in their offense. The Georgia game notes, the first paragraph points out that Kentucky had the longest scoring drive of the 2021 season against Georgia when they got that backdoor cover on like a 12-minute, 13-play drive. And then they had the longest non-scoring drive against Georgia last year where it was, 14 plays, throwing an interception at the 2. Will Levis, that short corner right there, threw a pick. And I don't think Kentucky, they've in years past, there's been a mindset we have to just slow everything down, play in the mud with them, and hope that can be our recipe for success. But Kentucky's been explosive enough offensively and defensively in creating turnovers that you actually can kind of shrink that margin a little bit. But a lot of it is going to come down to just the starts, I think, because it's been well documented how slow Georgia started this year. Whereas Kentucky, they opened up a 24-0 lead at Vanderbilt, 23-0 lead against Florida. It probably won't be that big, but if they're going to have a chance to win at number 1 Georgia, which Georgia hasn't lost at night since 2009, and it was Kentucky, ironically. But in order to do that, you got to have some things go your way, and you have to also take advantage if Georgia does make mistakes. So 2 years ago, down in Sanford Stadium, remember the fumble that was on the ground that nobody picked up?
Yeah.
And, the Georgia guy fell, and I think he scored 2 plays later. So that was a missed opportunity.
That seems right.
Missed opportunity for Kentucky, and then 2017, Josh Allen picks off a pass in the first quarter. They got the ball in the 30, miss a wide open tight end, kick a field goal, and I think they had a 3-0 lead and then lost, I think they scored 1 garbage time touchdown. So you have to take advantage of any opportunity you get if you're Kentucky. But the one thing that I do find weird, Palmer, is can people run the ball in Georgia now? Is that a thing? Because for the longest time, you just had to be like, well, God, I hope we can figure out how to pass this week because ain't no way we're running it.
Yeah, I think as you look at Georgia this season so far, is that has not been the strength of their defense, and it's really, from a personnel standpoint, it's not the strength of their defense. They are very strong in the secondary. You've got all SEC caliber players in Malachi Starks and Javon Bullard at safety, Kamari Lassiter at corner. Tyke Smith has played up to an all SEC caliber level, better than anybody had expected. And maybe it's what we should have expected with him transferring over from West Virginia a couple of seasons ago, where he was a freshman All-American and then an All-American his sophomore season. Got off to a slow start at Georgia. So maybe the expectations coming into this year weren't all too high, but he's performed at that kind of a level. So the strength for Georgia defensively, personnel wise, playing wise, has been in the secondary. That's kind of because you look at what Georgia has in the front 7 and what they've lost in the front 7 over the last couple of years. It's impossible to go about replacing Jordan Davis, Trayvon Walker, Devontae Wyatt, Jalen Carter, all 4 of those guys first round picks in a 2-year span. And so, it's just unrealistic to expect that, to expect to have to kind of continue that.
But everybody did. They were just like, oh, Georgia will just go load.
Did. Exactly. So, I think that with the linebackers, you've got good players in Smile Munnin and Jamon Dumas-Johnson on the inside, but they're not the fastest players. So if you Smile is much faster than Jamon, but if you force those guys to get out to the edge where Georgia doesn't have a strength there either, Had 2 outside linebackers taken in the draft last year. Nolan Smith was a first rounder. Robert Beal was a later round pick. And that's a position that they've had some strength at over the last couple of seasons. If you force Georgia out to the edge, teams have had more success. And so like last week with Auburn, Peyton Thorne takes off for a 61-yarder outside the tackles. That's where they had most of their success. If you're trying to run between the tackles, if you can get a great push up front, you can pick up some yardage, but that is where Georgia would prefer to play you. They would prefer to play you between the tackles. And I haven't seen enough of Ray Davis. I obviously watched him at Vanderbilt, watched that Florida game as well, where he just absolutely went off. And, I think that running between the tackles is more his game. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Obviously capable of getting to the outside, but maybe not in the way that Peyton Thorne, and certainly don't think that Devin Leary is that kind of a quarterback.
Leary is certainly let me extend this play as best I can, and then make something out of nothing. And he had one really long run at Vandy, but we haven't really seen him take off downfield too much, only really out of necessity. But if there is a strength in Kentucky's run game, it's the tackles and the tight ends. That long touchdown run that Davis had, it was off that left tackle where they just came crashing down. Those tight ends came barreling in. And so, like, he had one really cool move, too. And I say really cool move because that's all. I mean, it was a one-on-one on an outside zone with the Florida linebacker, and the dude bit on an inside fake, and he beat him to the outside and got a gain of 10. So Davis has shown a lot more explosiveness than I expected, because going in this year, I did expect the same thing too, Palmer, that like, all right, this dude's like a old school Benny Snell, just get 3 or 4 yards, but he's not going to be able to get the big play. And he's got eight gains of 30-plus yards. Is the most in the SEC. So they do have that explosiveness available in the run game. The part that has been a disappointment and it's really the reason why Kentucky fans aren't pounding their chests and calling for an upset over Georgia this week, is because what was supposed to be a strength, the passing game and the wide receivers, has just been woefully inconsistent. Now, they've had their moments, don't get me wrong. There's been some big plays. Barryon Brown ran a killer out and up against Vandy. They've had their moments. Tavion Robinson had some awesome catches early on in the season, right? It was back-to-back games right before halftime. He caught just killer back shoulder throws in the back of the end zone. Pretty passes. But the drops have been a problem, particularly with Dane Key, who had a great freshman season, but just mentally something's off there. And then B, we don't know the health of those receivers. So Brown and Robinson, they both have 19 receptions apiece. That's the most on the team. They both left a little dinged up. I get the sense that Barryon, they're just kind of withholding him from practice, and he'll probably be good to go by Saturday. But it feels like it's like a hamstring that they're just wanting to be extra cautious about. Whereas like Tavion, I'm not really sure what it was. He wasn't at the practice field yesterday, so I'm a little more concerned that he won't be available and that they'll have to play a true freshman, Anthony Brown, who, fun fact, his uncle's John Legend, so that's cool. He was a pretty big-time get from Ohio, but it would still be a true freshman who's logged some snap. He's got a couple of catches, but they might be asking a true freshman to start in the slot against those Georgia defensive backs, which would be, it'd be a tall task. And
I think that those receivers, I mean, like you said, the potential is certainly there. That you've got big potential in Devin Leary as well. It's just not. It hasn't played out in the way that you might have hoped, and so
it hasn't been as consistent, because you just thought that they would do the easy stuff and just make it look easy. It turns out the easy stuff is harder than it looks. Because the guys who do that are very, very good.
Yeah, and so to me, I think that first of all, going back to Ray Davis there, I probably should have put in a little bit more stock in his outside run game. Considering Kirby Smart compared him to DeAndre Swift, who was, a pretty good counter type runner.
Dude, the Swift cut on Mike Edwards, I've never seen a cut deflate a stadium. Like, it was just like, oh, well, we're done. That's it. Game over. That was,
But I mean, with those receivers, I think that the way that Kentucky keeps this game closer and makes that potential upset, makes Georgia fans hold their breath a little bit into the second half, into the fourth quarter, is that those receivers make big plays. They live up to the expectations that there were for them preseason. So, I think that those guys are going to be big in this game, and watching the matchups there between those guys and Georgia's secondary, specifically Dalen Everett in that second cornerback spot opposite of Kamari Lassiter. He's been picked on a little bit. He's a first-year starter in the SEC, which is what you would expect. That kind of a player to be thrown at more so than the all SEC caliber player opposite of him. And that's not to say that Dalen Everett isn't all SEC caliber. He's certainly a very talented player, but he's very green. He's in his first year starting. I mean, I think back with Georgia, think back to that 2018 season, with you had DeAndre Baker on one side, All-American, All SEC, freak show. And then you had a freshman in Tyson Campbell opposite of him. Well, Dalen Everett is a sophomore, but still a first-year starter. So, even last year with Kamari Lassiter opposite of Keely Ringo, you go at the guy that is a little bit more green. And so, if Kentucky can get some of those talented receivers up against a corner who has had his ups and downs, and if they can hit a couple of plays, there's potential there for the Wildcats to keep this one closer, especially when Kentucky's on offense.
My next question for you is to kind of flip it on the other side.
Yeah.
Are the Georgia running backs healthy? Are they going to play? Like what? I feel like every week it's just like, I know Kirby and Stoops went to the same school on injury reports where it's just, nothing is something. But it feels like every week there's been just like, he's getting back, but he's not quite there yet. Like, is Mims the tackle? I know McConkey, that was his first game a week ago, right? So he should be probably getting more back up to speed. But what is the kind of health status right now on that Georgia offense?
Honestly, this is the healthiest that Georgia has been in a long time, because you've got Amarius Mims, who you mentioned, the right tackle, will be out. He is out. He had the tightrope ankle procedure after the South Carolina game.
How crazy is it that we know what tightrope ankle procedures are now? Like that's
exactly. Hadn't heard of it before 2018, 2019, and now it's just the lingo of a football writer. But so he had the tightrope ankle procedure, and he is out. Georgia, probably looking to get him back around the bye week here in a couple of weeks. In his place, they've been playing with a lineup that features Dylan Fairchild at left guard, and then bumping the usual starter at left guard, Xavier Truss, over to right tackle. Micah Morris has also been featured in there at guard some. And I think that the conversation about the offensive line and their health goes hand in hand with the running backs and their health, their inability to get it going. Georgia has not run the ball great. They are a team right now that needs to pass to open up the run, which works when you've got a player like Brock Bowers, but that's probably not what you desired, what you draw up to start, the season. Dejan Edwards is healthy. He missed the first couple of games, but he is back and looking really strong. Yeah. Kendall Milton is continuing to work his way back. He was in the lineup last week, did not get a carry, but did play. So, what does his continued progress look like coming off of a sprained MCL? It was an MCL for Edwards in the preseason. It's an MCL for Milton now. Roderick Robinson, a true freshman running back that's been thrust into the rotation because Branson Robinson.
Well, we all got it.
Yeah. I was wondering if I was going to be podcasting when that came off. And sure enough, I was. But Branson Robinson goes down with with an injury in the preseason. Roderick Robinson, those two are not related, but true freshman that's being relied upon and more so in the run game. That is dealing with an ankle sprain as well. He is probably not going to play. I would put him in the very doubtful category. So, what does that mean for Georgia? They've got Dylan Bell, Dylan Bell, who's a wide receiver turned running back. Still getting a lot of reps at wide receiver, but he's a kind of player that they've used in the backfield, which is really funny to see number 86 back there.
It's like when David Montgomery was, or
yeah,
was it David or Ty Montgomery?
Ty Montgomery.
Yeah, had the 88s for the Packers. That threw me off.
They've got a walk-on in Cash Jones, which is a great name, who's been playing back there as well. But that is certainly, as we talked about, the strengths and weaknesses of the Georgia defense, with the run game being the weaker side there. It's also the weaker side on the Georgia offense. And so, I'm curious for you, what's the outlook for the Kentucky secondary here? And listening to Mark Stoops and the comparisons that he gave for Brock Bowers, and he brought up names like Rob Gronkowski and Michael Jordan in terms of the caliber of players we're talking about, the caliber of athletes that we're talking about there. What is the best possible way to cover Brock Bowers if you're Kentucky?
So the thing is in 2 years, they've gotten Superman Brock Bowers. That happened down in between the hedges. And then last year, he only caught 2 passes for 10 yards. And I know that game got kind of weird and sloppy and ugly. But the thing is Kentucky's defense, I'm getting to the point where I'm thinking this will probably be their best defense they've had. It doesn't have the star power that some of those other ones had that we think so highly about here in Lexington. Like, there's not a Josh Allen out there just eating all the sacks. But they do have really good players at all 3 levels. And Deion Walker in the middle, like running against Kentucky, trying to run against Kentucky is a fool's errand. Billy Napier tried to do it. It didn't work. They had a couple pop, but nothing more than 15 yards or so. So I know Bobo wants to run the ball, and he's going to try to run it probably more than he should. But I'm confident Kentucky's run defense, because of Deion Walker in the middle. The defensive line in general, they're getting a lot of pressure on quarterbacks, and it's not all coming from him, right? I think 8 different guys are responsible for 14 different sacks. So it's that, and in the back end, there was was big question marks at cornerback. They had replaced 2 guys, 1 6th-round pick in the NFL, Carrington Valentine, for the Green Bay Packers. They like him a lot as CB4 for them right now as a rookie. There was a lot of question marks there, and instead, it's kind of the inverse of what we thought about receivers. We thought we were getting something guaranteed, right? Well, the biggest question marks turned into a strength, where even when guys, Andrew Phillips, there was a guy that made a great catch. Caleb Douglas made a great catch, 36-yard catch. I mean, he's got mossed on. And that might happen. Like, Brock Bowers is probably going to moss on somebody on Saturday at some point. But this team's been very resilient. They've had a short-term memory. And Max Hairston, he's the guy who had played as little as anybody, and he's just a dog from Detroit. He had 10 tackles, led the team in tackles. He's 2nd overall. He's got 3 picks. He had 2 he returned to the house against Vanderbilt. Very physical at the catch point. And I think that's been the most pleasant part of the secondary so far, is they've been very physical. They haven't shied away from the competition. They faced those first 4 games were very pass-happy teams that, sometimes they were maybe exposed a little bit on 3rd and longs. But a lot of that is learning how to play. One thing that is working on Kentucky's side when it comes specifically to Bowers, to get back to the original question, Trevin Wallace, he's from Jessup, played at Wayne County, Georgia. He's badass. I remember his lead recruiter, John Summerall, told me that he broke he went to the same school as Lindsey. Who's Lindsey? He had the touchdown in the championship year against Lindsey Scott. I mean, he broke Lindsey Scott's 100-meter record in high school. They went to they're alums of the same school. He's a hell of an athlete, and where he's really at his best is it's delayed blitzes and then covering a guy like Brock Bowers, because he's as good enough as athlete to keep up with him. So what I'm curious is how much did they try to dedicate one-on-ones with Trevin and Bowers, if Bowers is lined up as a split end, or do they see him as such a valuable pass rush option that they're just going to tell him to see ball, hit ball, go get Carson Beck, put him on the ground? He was leading the SEC in sacks after only like 3 weeks. So I if you're a betting man, which I am. We just got it here in the state of Kentucky. Shout out FanDuel, great sponsors on 3. I really think Kentucky's defense is going to do a good job of slowing down Georgia, forcing Carson Beck to beat them. But Georgia's a team that doesn't really beat itself, and ultimately Kentucky they've made a lot of mistakes. They've been able to overcome them with explosives against inferior opponents. I just don't think you can do that against a Georgia team that just doesn't get in its own way. So that's why I think of all of the close games in this quote unquote rivalry, this one will probably be the most tense, I think, for Georgia fans. But ultimately, the Georgia fans are there. It's at Sanford Stadium. It's under the lights. And it's going to take some catastrophic mistakes, I think, to give Kentucky's an opportunity, a chance to get enough offense to score. What do you think is the magic number? Like, if we're looking for...
And that's kind of where I wanted to take this conversation as we start to wrap up. The line, according to FanDuel, is 14.5. And if I'm not mistaken, it opened at 17, earlier this week, and it got bet down. I think the magic number for Georgia is to win this game, not necessarily to cover that 14.5. To win this game, I think Georgia needs to score 27.
Oh, wow.
27 to 30, 31 maybe.
I was thinking that this might be a race to 20. Like, I'm thinking it's going to be like that. That's how much confidence I have in each defense. Now, maybe I'm just drinking the Kool-Aid because I just watched Kentucky play Graham Mertz. But I, especially because I already know Kentucky's going to have like 2 or 3 3-and-outs on offense. The timing of those is important for Kentucky. Is it when they have a 10-0 lead, or is it when they desperately need to score so they can still try to keep running the football? Because there was one week where they had they had 2 bad snaps. Another week they had 2 drops for first downs on one drive, and then the next drive they went 3-and-out again because Leary dropped a snap, and the next play he got stepped on and tripped and fell down. Kentucky's going to have those dumb moments.
And I guess as I think about that number that I threw out there, it is largely factored in the fact that Georgia just gave up 20 to Auburn, but that's that 20, 14 of those came on, short field turnovers, where Auburn went and was able to capitalize on it. If Georgia doesn't make those same kind of mistakes offensively against a better Kentucky team than Auburn, maybe that 27 number is probably not as high. It could be a race to 20. I think that Georgia's offense has played well, in my opinion. I think that Carson Beck, especially the last 2 weeks, take those turnovers out from the Auburn game, and really they were just, one of them was one hell of a play by Jalen Simpson from Auburn, and then the other was a punch out from behind, just a little bit fluky of turnovers. Obviously, whether it's fluky or not, Georgia can't afford to have those. But I think that offensively, Carson Beck is starting to find a rhythm. Mike Bobo is starting to figure out how to play call with this kind of a team. Getting Lab McConkey back, it makes a big impact at that wide receiver spot. And then you've got guys that can contribute alongside, Bowers and McConkey in Robert Thomas and Marcus Rosemy Jackson and Dominic Lovett. They've got guys that can contribute. So I think that Georgia's going to put up.
You're leaning towards an over, essentially, because I think it's at like 45. So if Georgia scores 27, if Georgia scores 27, Kentucky has to score 20 to get there. I don't know if Kentucky can score more than 24 points. That's kind of where I'm at, and that's where I think the gap is, and why Georgia ultimately lived. Because
do you think that what do you think about that 14.5 number?
Oh man, I got the look ahead line at 23.5 and hammered it. Hammered it. It was on Friday, and I was like, And I didn't know how the Auburn game would go, but I know that Kentucky's going to kind of play them close, slow things down. It's just a matter of, are they as explosive against Georgia, or is this explosiveness that we've seen early in the season, is that all a mirage? Or is that sort of just what you're going to get against inferior teams? Because that is the one thing that when Kentucky fans were talking about paths to win against Georgia, there is still yes, they're slow starting team. Yes, like everybody thought, like we'd made Stetson Bennett jokes, but he was we did not give him enough credit, right? It was going to take some time for Carson Beck to get going. The one thing that the two stats that were most jarring were just the lack of sacks and just the lack of running, because I'm just used to Georgia, and especially that offensive line with so many future NFL guys on it, like their inability to run the football. So like that, those were the two things that shocked me, but it's still just because they're not, what's the Avenger guy? I can't think of his name with the gauntlet. Why am I blanking on him? Thanos. They don't have Thanos with all the Infinity Stones, but Thanos, even without all 6, is still pretty darn good. So I think that's where I'm at on this game, Palmer. I think it's going to be one of those where Kentucky probably scares Georgia more than they've ever scared them. But it should be. It's probably going to end up being the Dogs. Can you name the last time a number 1 team lost at home in the regular season?
Last time the number 1 team lost at home in the regular season. Maybe 2020?
No, it was not.
Further back?
Way further back. It actually happened. It was Johnny Football got it started at Alabama, and then it rolled into the next week. David Shaw and Stanford dragged the Oregon Ducks into the mud and knocked off Chip Kelly. But
that was
the reason
2012.
2012, yeah, and part of the reason is usually when a team starts to look a little shaky at number 1 and they're still winning, voters will just move them up. Michigan hasn't done enough to earn the right to move up, and even though Georgia's been shaky, like they're still the 2-time champs. You kind of got to dethrone them first. So I know Kentucky's going to try to do it Saturday.
and I think that one thing that works in Georgia's favor here, along with playing at home and returning home, is the fact that they didn't play their best against Auburn. I think that that's a wake-up call for them, and so – that 14.5 number, I still don't know about it. My partner, Jake Rowe, over at DawgsHQ, he thinks it's a little bit of a sucker line, and he thinks that Georgia's going to cover that. But the next time Georgia covers a spread this season will be the first time they cover a spread this season.
Exactly. I know there's some smart bettors that have middled this and have Georgia minus 14.5 and Kentucky plus 23.5. So
yeah. So,
but either way,
should be a good one. Should be a good one. 7 o'clock.
Really should.
ESPN, under the lights of Sanford Stadium. Something that Georgia fans were not too happy that the number 1 team and defending champs hadn't gotten home night games. This is the 3rd of them this season. So after a UT Martin opener at night and UAB at night, this one should be a great atmosphere. Top 20 matchup, number 20 Kentucky, number 1 Georgia. Nick, really appreciate you coming on and joining us.
It's been a pleasure.